Welcome back to the Love Your 9 to 5 show, episode number 20.
I run two small businesses. One is a public relations company that serves nonprofits, foundations, and purpose driven brands. And the other is an online community called Max List that helps people find work that matters. I actually have had two long periods of unemployment, once in my 20s and once in my 30s. So I know what it's like to cash that last unemployment check. After I cashed that last unemployment check, I got very serious about looking for work and how to do it in a thoughtful, effective way.
Caution, you will begin to love your 9 to 5 with this show. Join us as we explore and discover your unique strengths and learn to apply them to your daily business activities with your host, Shmuel Septimus.
Welcome to this episode of the Love Your 9 to 5 show. My guest today is Mac Prichard. Mac is joining us today from Portland, Oregon. Mac is the publisher of Max List. I actually just saw on Mac's profile on LinkedIn that he's actually from Boston and was involved as a PR information officer for the Big Dig back in the day. Mac, of course, is a podcast host of the Find Your Dream Job podcast, author of The Land Your Dream Job Anywhere and in Portland, two separate books, I believe. And I'm sure lots more that we're about to find out. Mac, thank you so much for taking some time and coming on the show today.
Well, thank you for inviting me to be on the show. It's an honor.
Thank you. Now, before we jump in, I know that I shared a little bit about who you are, but if you don't mind, can you just take us a little bit deeper and tell us a little bit more about who you are personally and professionally and how this kind of all evolved to where you are right now?
Absolutely. My roots are in the Midwest. I grew up in Iowa, and I lived on the East Coast for 11 years, 2 years in Washington, D.C., and 9 years indeed in Boston, and now I'm in the Pacific Northwest. I run two small businesses. One is a public relations company that serves nonprofits, foundations, and purpose-driven brands. And the other is an online community called Max List that helps people find work that matters. We have a job board, blogs, books, courses, and other services that help people not only find job listings online, but because so many postings, that most jobs never make it to a job board, we also teach people about the nuts and bolts of job hunting.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Okay, so that's quite a diverse, range of services that you offer, but all around the focus of really finding that dream job. Now, you've done other things I've seen in your LinkedIn profile involved in politics and PR, and there were other positions that you've held. When was that one moment when you sort of realized that this is your mission and this is what you're going to do, help those job seekers end up in work that's meaningful and fulfilling for them?
Well, my purpose in my career has been to serve others and make a difference on issues I care about or in the community where I live and work. And I have indeed had a lot of different jobs. When I graduated from the University of Iowa, and it was a long time ago, way back in 1980, I wanted to do three things. I wanted to write, I wanted to work on electoral campaigns, and I wanted to do human rights advocacy.
Okay.
So in the last 35 plus years, I've had a lot of different jobs. I worked for two international human rights organizations. I was a speechwriter to a governor. I was indeed the first spokesman for Boston's Big Dig way back in the 80s. I'd worked on about a dozen election campaigns at both the local and the federal level. And I've been a spokesman for public agencies, nonprofits, and today I run two small businesses that are certified benefit corporations. And they're part of this global movement of business as a force for social good. So the moment that when I realized that really was a pivotal moment for me was when I was in college in Iowa. I took an internship in Washington, D.C., and I'd never been east of Chicago. And when I took this position, I learned my basic public relations skills, how to pitch reporters, how to write news releases, but also how communications could be a force for social change. And it showed me how the possibilities that were there if I had clear goals and if I put in the work and the things that I could do. And I think if I'd never gotten east of Chicago, I might not have seen those possibilities.
Oh boy. Well, I've been to LA one time, and I'm aware that there is something east of Chicago, but, but that's about as far as it goes for me.
Yeah.
But okay, but so you've really experienced quite a diverse group of settings, of work settings, and been involved in so many projects in really different areas in the country, which kind of gives you, so to speak, the rights and I guess you can see things on the 30,000-foot level, where you kind of, have been involved in so many different, companies and ventures that, that kind of can really help you, be successful where you are right now. If you don't mind sharing with us a particular incident that happened earlier on in your career and that in your mind was a failure, and the bigger the failure it was, the bigger the lesson there is for you and for our listeners. And I'm not doing this just to torture you, but, precisely for someone who's had such a long and successful career, sometimes these prove to be such teaching moments, that we can all learn from, and perhaps learn from there and start from where your lesson began.
I'm glad you asked this question, because when I give the highlights of my career, people might think, what a glamorous background and how effortless it all looks. But here's the deal. I actually have had 2 long periods of unemployment, once in my 20s and once in my 30s. Mm-hmm. And so I know what it's like to cash that last unemployment check. And the second time I came within 1 week of doing that again. The reason I struggled was I didn't learn how to look for work. It wasn't a skill that I mastered. I could have gone to the career services office when I was an undergraduate, or perhaps learned in other ways through books or mentors, but I didn't master that skill. Once I did in Boston, after I cashed that last unemployment check, I got very serious about looking for work and how to do it in a thoughtful, effective way. Once I did that, it took me a couple of months, but that's how I found that position at the Big Dig. And I learned the value of having clear goals, how to do informational interviews, how to network, and how to ask people for help in a search. And the reason that was so valuable was because, again, most jobs are never posted. In those years, way back in the 80s, the way I thought you looked for work was you looked at newspaper ads. Today, so many people think the way you do it is to look at job boards. And you should look at job boards. But the lesson I learned from that experience, and what I see other people who have successful careers master, is they get clear about how to look for work. And once I did that, I found a great job. I will also add that didn't, even though I had success that time, several years later I had another period of unemployment, and I had to get even better at job hunting. So it's an ongoing process, but having that skill has helped me not only have success, but most importantly, I think, get jobs that gave me professional, personal satisfaction, but also allowed me to be of service to others and to the community.
Excellent. Well, that was a very full answer, and I would just add to that in today's professional environment, where we're all expected to change jobs and careers multiple times throughout our careers, this is a skill that is becoming more and more valuable, in our careers. So really, that leads right into the next part. Now that we know a little bit about who you are, and obviously that's just really, on, just surface level. But let's move on to the next piece. Let's assume that someone already has done the introspective work of identifying their own skills, their strengths, their talents, their aspirations and passions, and they have a fair idea of where all that is and, what they are, and that's a lot. But now specifically, they're looking now to identify what their dream job should be. They're looking for ways to find it and, find where that job is, and then to actually get that job. Can you kind of walk us through the steps practically that someone would need to take if they're in that situation?
Well, first, I would say to somebody who has done exactly what you described, congratulations. That's a lot of good work and it's going to pay dividends. So knowing what your strengths are is crucial. You
Hmm.
also need to be clear about your goals. Often I meet people who are looking for work and I'll ask them, what would you like to do? Or what are your goals? And they say, I'm keeping all my options open. And that's not a great answer because if you're not clear about what your goals are, you make it so much harder for people to help you. I find if I press people, they usually have a short list of two or three kinds of opportunities that interest them. And so I encourage them to say that out loud and say, I'm exploring opportunities in communications and marketing and technology companies or nonprofits or some other field, whatever the answer might be. Because when you say that out loud, people will think of ways they can be of help to you. They'll think of people you should talk to, companies you might contact. But having that goal and sharing it with others is the vital first step.
Right. I mean, I'll just share that a family member mentioned to me once, when I said, "Oh, you can come over anytime you're in the area," an open invitation is no invitation. So if you're open to any job, then you're not valuable to anybody until they know you a little bit deeper, until you know yourself a little bit deeper.
Yeah. And your most important asset for all of us, whether we're looking for work or just life in general, is our time. And how we spend our time matters. So if you're open to all possibilities and you're applying for every job that you see online or that people tell you about, you're just going to spread yourself too thin. And when you do get interviews, the odds are you won't because you won't be as persuasive as people who are clear about what they want.
Hmm.
But when you do have those opportunities to talk to employers, you're just not going to be an effective candidate because it will become clear in the conversation that you're uncertain about what it is exactly you want to do.
Got it. So let's assume that someone has now identified two or three areas. Let's say you said communications, technology, let's say in a for-profit company, just for example. So now they want to actually find, that particular job and actually get hired in that industry with something related to that. What are the next steps that this person should do?
Well, once you know what you want, then you have to figure out where you want to go. You have to build a map. So you need to identify the companies that offer the opportunities that you want. And the best way to do that is to go out and talk to people. Now, you should do some online research. Many cities will have a local business journal that will publish a book of lists, for example, that will give you a list of the leading technology companies. Business magazines in a state will often produce lists like that. There's lots of good research you can do, but don't get paralyzed by analysis. Go out and ask people who have contacts in those fields or are leaders in those industries or who work at the companies where you want to be for their advice and their insights about the best employers, who might be growing, who might be adding jobs, because most jobs are filled by word of mouth. They're not posted. And there are estimates out there that as many as 80% of jobs are
Wow.
part of this hidden job market. There are conversations happening about those positions all the time. So you need to know where you want to go. And then once you're clear about that, and you can learn that through informational interviews and research, then you need to make yourself part of the conversations about the positions that are being filled.
Wow, so that's really fascinating. 80% or something like that of the jobs that are being filled are not going through the traditional means. That means that if you're trying to be someone a rule follower and just do whatever is expected and going online and filling out online applications and reaching out to HR directors, you only have a 20% chance of actually getting the job.
Well, even more important, I think, is you're probably only seeing 20% of the jobs that are out there.
Oh, okay.
And then think about, because there again, these are estimates, but if as many as 80% of the jobs are never posted, think about how you're spending your time. Many people, because they don't know any better, they think the way to look for work is to respond to job board postings. So they spend 100% of their time doing that. And in fact, they could be missing out on as many as 80% of the jobs that are available.
So how do you go about, finding those 80% if they're actually not listed anywhere? And, I did my research and I have a general idea of the companies and whatever, but now how do I find those 80%?
You go out and you talk to the people who are in the companies that are doing hiring or might be adding people. You connect with hiring managers, and there are a number of ways you can do this. First, once you have that list of companies where you want to work, look to your own network. And the two best places to start are LinkedIn, and if you've graduated from a college or gone to graduate school, look at your alumni database. Identify people who are in the companies where you want to be, and reach out to them and ask for what's called an informational interview. This is a structured 20 to 30-minute conversation that lets you introduce yourself and share your goals. It lets you get insights into what's happening inside that organization, as well as the field in general. And it's also a way to grow your network because in that meeting, you can ask for introductions to 2 or 3 other leaders in that field.
So this is more of a social interview than a professional interview. You're not speaking to the hiring manager director, right? You're speaking to whoever you know, be it a former colleague or somebody from college or whatever.
It is a professional interview, and it is a business meeting. And when you call it, as with any business meeting, you're in charge. So you've got to lay out the agenda, and you've got to be clear about the outcomes you want from the conversation. Even when you're sitting down with a friend. And a successful informational interview lets you do 3 things. It lets you introduce yourself and share your story and your goals. Second thing it lets you do is get insights by asking very specific questions. You should walk into the room with 3 to 5 questions about that company or the field and developments in that world. And the third thing it lets you do is grow your network because you ask for introductions to people who can help you with your search. And the ultimate goal here, of course, is to identify jobs that are either coming up or are being filled, and find out who the decision makers are, what they care about, and find ways to get in front of them. And you may have to go through the front door through a formal application process as well. Some jobs, as we've talked about, are formally advertised. But for those that aren't, it's these kinds of conversations that hiring managers rely on to find good candidates.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so let's keep on moving with this process. So first, I'll interject. As a nursing home administrator, I do have to hire people for various positions. And if I ever could come across, through talking to one of my staff or anyone else that I know in the industry, someone says, "Hey, I know a great person for your marketing position or whatever other position," that automatically, as a hiring manager, that's so much easier to manage and, to push that person through the process. And I have, much more confidence that this is not just a resume that might lead to nowhere. So I completely understand, from the hiring perspective, why it's so much easier. If I get introduced by a colleague and say, "Hey, here's somebody that I worked with at company X. He was significant and successful at X, and now he could come and do Y for us," that makes sense that would push it so much further.
I'm glad you brought that up because I think many of your listeners have been involved in hiring and can recall similar circumstances. And what's at play here, it's not a conspiracy, it's just human nature. Hiring is it's a time-consuming, expensive, risky business, and you want to get it right. So to manage the risk, most hiring managers turn to people they trust, or they rely on recommendations from people they trust. So if they've worked with someone before, they know what they're going to get. And if someone they're working with or someone they rely on recommends another person, they know that that person who's being vouched for is probably less of a risk than somebody who's coming in over the transom. You, as a candidate, having a recommendation isn't going to get you the job, but it is going to get you in the door, and it's going to give you an opportunity to compete. And you're doing these kinds of searches, that can make a big difference in getting the job you want.
Okay, now leading right into my next question is I have the interview and I have that personal connection now, and maybe indirectly to the hiring manager. What do I do now to ace that job and to make sure that I have the very, very best chance of actually being hired for that position?
Do something that most candidates don't do, which is spend the time to understand the employer's problems and needs. You need to know what keeps them up at night, because employers hire problem solvers. And the more you know about that company's needs, the more you'll be able to make the case about how you can solve those problems. Too many candidates walk into that interview room, first of all, without any preparation, and that just makes it almost impossible to get the job. But you not only need to prepare by practicing answers to possible questions and understanding the background of the people you're talking to, but you've also got to understand what their problems are. And you can do some of that with research by looking at the website and talking to your contacts in the field. One of the most effective ways to do it is to ask the hiring manager about their needs. And one of the best questions I think you can use to do that goes like this. When you have the opportunity to ask a question, you can say to the hiring manager, if I was fortunate enough to get this job, if you and I were sitting down in 12 months for my annual review, what are the 3 things you want me to tell you I've done for you? And when you ask that question, usually the hiring manager will tell you something that isn't in the position description, hasn't been addressed in the questions. And you've got an opportunity to listen, learn, and show that person how you would approach that problem. And the odds are good that the other candidates aren't asking that question. So you have an opportunity, too, to distinguish yourself from in what may be a very crowded field.
Wow. I absolutely love that concept for a couple of reasons. I mean, number one is you're turning this interrogation into a conversation. And now, even though you're being interviewed, you actually are showing a certain level of confidence that you're asking a question. Another point is that, we had on Adam Lieberman in another podcast where he talks about buying questions from a marketing perspective. When you're talking to someone who's looking to buy a car, you say, were you to buy a car, would you prefer blue or red? Without pressuring them to buy a car, but just trying to understand their needs. That on some level already psychologically helps them get past that. Am I hiring? Am I not hiring? It kind of puts the barriers down, and let's just talk, person to person about the actual job that gets done. And the third thing is that you actually get to find out what are the real needs of the hiring manager, and then you can figure out to see if you genuinely are a good fit to be a solution to those problems. Then you can explain how you would really be a solution to that problem. So that is absolutely phenomenal. I really love that. I know we can go on quite... Go ahead. What were you going to say?
Oh, I was just going to say I agree with all 3 of your points, but I particularly think your second point is so important because once you and the hiring manager start having a conversation about that person's needs, they begin to see you as a peer and as a problem solver, and they start imagining you as a colleague.
Exactly.
That is just so powerful.
Yeah, no, it definitely is. I mean, so many times people come into an interview with that stress for they just cashed their last unemployment check and they know they have their bills to pay. And frankly, they couldn't care less at that point what they do. I just need to get on next week's payroll. You know what? I don't care. Let me clean the floors until you figure out what I could do. And from a hiring manager's perspective, it's not a charity fund, even if it is. But this part is the business part, and it has to make sense. Now, I know we could go on for quite some time, and you have a lot more information to share. If you had to recommend, other than your own book, which we'll definitely put a link to that in the show notes, but if there's another book that you think would really help the job seeker find and really help them in this process of attaining the job that's the right fit for them and for the company they're working for, what would that one book be?
I'm a big fan of the book Mindset. It's written by Carol Dweck. And are you familiar with it?
I am not. I will be, but not yet.
Okay. She's a professor at Stanford
Okay.
and a psychologist. And her research shows that people really fall into two groups. There are people with what she calls a fixed mindset, and they believe qualities like talent and intelligence are fixed. And people who have this approach spend a lot of time documenting their accomplishments, but they don't grow. And there's another group of people, and these are the ones who I see have the most success in a job search and in a career. And these are people with what Dweck calls a growth mindset. They believe you can develop and improve your talents and your intelligence, and they spend time learning. They take risks, and they're not afraid to fail, and they will fail. I think everyone I meet who is very successful has had some spectacular failures along the way. So I strongly recommend that book.
Excellent. I'm even more motivated to read it because I'm a very big proponent of the growth mindset, and I know so many examples of people who were really more limited and worked on themselves to grow past what their perceived limitations. So I'm excited to get it and read that book. I hope it's on Audible. That's the way I consume my content, but either way, we'll definitely get there. What is something that you're working on right now that you're really excited about that that our listeners can maybe watch you grow along this journey? Maybe something at Max List that you're working on right now.
We just launched a new course at Max List on interview skills, and it includes information about some of the principles that you and I have talked about. And we did it because too many people walk into that job interview room unprepared. They don't, and often they want to get ready, but they're not sure how to do it. And so that's a big part of what we do at Max List is teaching people how to be successful. And with both of my firms, the Public Relations Company and Max List, what unites them, and again has been a constant in my career, is service and being of help to others and helping people not only with their careers but in the community as well.
Okay, excellent. That really sounds like something that some of the listeners will definitely find very useful. Now, if they want to continue following everything that you're doing, what is the best way for them to follow what you and your team are doing?
Visit maxlist.org. And as you mentioned, we have a book out, Land Your Dream Job Anywhere. If your listeners would like, they can download a free chapter of the book by visiting maxlist.org/loveyour9to5. And that's love your, and then the numbers N925.
Okay, awesome. Thank you very much for sharing that with the listeners. That is very generous of you. Again, I know your time is valuable, so thank you so much for sharing the information that you did with the listeners, and we'll definitely put links to everything that we mentioned in the show notes for everybody to listen to. Thank you so much for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me on the show.
What a fantastic episode that was with Mark Prichard. Mark, thank you again for coming on the show with us this time. Looking at our iTunes reviews, we're going to start reading one or two out at the end of every show, and if you head over to iTunes right now and you leave us a nice review, we will have yours featured on a future show as well. This one is from Azul from San Diego. Azul writes, "The power of starting something new. I loved the simplicity of this show. The genuine discovery and tone that the interviewer takes is refreshing and charming. I thought the guests were honest, humble, and very helpful, worth the listen." Well, thank you, Azul, for helping us support the show. And if you enjoyed the show as well, please head over to iTunes and leave us a review that will help iTunes show this show, pun intended, to others who are interested in growing in these areas. Till next time, get out there, start living your professional life intentionally, and watch it spill over into your personal life as well.